Welcome to the Family Skeptical, Parenting Through Nonbelief.
We're a married atheist couple raising two wonderful, strange children. We ask big questions, dissect weird parenting moments, and examine how society ignores or misrepresents families like ours. If you're any stripe of non-believer who's involved in raising children, welcome. You are our people.
Our kids have heard all our swears, but yours might not have. So be thoughtful if there are young people listening with you.
Ready for a spicy episode, moms?
I think it might be.
Yeah.
So this last weekend was really fun.
Yes, we had a spring solstice celebration that was coincidental with a major Christian holiday.
Exactly. We went to a very random town with our good friends and their kids for the long weekend. And it ended up working really, really well.
Yeah, the kids all want to do it again. I don't know how that's going to work out, but the desire is there.
And it was interesting because we had to cross a border to get to this weekend. And since COVID, the borders have really been awesomely empty. So this was the first time since COVID where we really had a long wait to get across. And I don't remember this ever being an issue before, but the long line was on a high bridge. And for some reason, my anxiety about heights just went off the charts.
Did you find yourself as an atheist praying to God, recanting your secularism, fearing death? No atheists in foxholes.
Well, I still felt
no
very
atheists
much like
on
an
high
atheist.
bridges.
I still felt very much like an atheist, just an atheist gripping her knee with a death grip for 45 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. But hey, the drive back was literally pull up to an empty lane and you're gone in 30 seconds. That was amazing.
That was amazing. But it was fun because we used that sort of unexpected stall to talk to the kids about Easter, which is something you'd been wanting to do. And I'm just
curious. I mean, it's super interesting.
Yeah, but what made you want to have the discussion? How do you think it went?
Well, the kids like storytelling. And, they don't know a lot about Christianity. They don't understand original sin because, what is there to understand if you're not steeped in that religious tradition, right? They don't perceive a need for substitutionary atonement for anything they've ever done. They heard me, swear Jesus' name plenty, just, whatever, randomly, but they don't know what significance he had in that religion. They also don't appreciate the myths, well, whatever, however you want to characterize them, the stories about humanity leading up to Jesus' birth and crucifixion and death. And I thought it was an opportunity given the weekend because it's nice for the kids to understand why they're getting off. And we live in a very, religious country now. And well, we lived in a very religious country before, but this one, at least more Catholic country. They really like their Easter here. And I thought it would be good for them to understand why so many of their classmates and friends and neighbors would be celebrating this weekend. And then also because they're really interested in storytelling across cultures and across history. And there is a story to be told about the holiday that doesn't begin with the Christians' use of this time in the year. And so we talked about, all the Near East celebrations. We even went back as far as looking at all solstice celebrations from early, agrarian communities. Because once we started to use what we learned about the natural world to create crops and crop cycles and make calendars to help make our growing and living easier, more effective, more productive. Solstice seasonal celebrations became a thing. And it's really interesting to chart how important times of the year are important, but for different reasons across time. So I wanted to share all of that with them. And I thought it was really cute how I just looked over and all of a sudden didn't even notice it at the time. But then I looked over and you were recording me talking about this. And so I'm sure you're going to put some of that on the podcast.
Yeah, I totally am. I'm going to put a few
that's
up.
Great. I hope the audio quality sucks so nobody has to hear me rant on and on about, how bunnies and eggs have nothing to do with Jesus.
Yeah. I mean, did the kids respond kind of how you thought they would?
Yeah, a mix of disinterest to idle curiosity. Though I will say Go was more engaged than Reader, because Reader just wanted to get back to watching his whatever on his iPad.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's almost a teenager in that regard. Gosh, Dad, you're so boring.
100%.
I just want to watch my YouTubes.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always interesting to me because, as we've discussed, I wasn't raised religiously, but I still feel like I was, and I don't know, well, I guess because my mom, very pointedly wanted me to know about all religions. And also just because since I grew up closer to family, I went to more religious events, So I had a little bit more experience with that. I'm always intrigued how the kids react. And we've tried to do religious education, but I feel like they come from a little bit more of a blank slate, even than I did. And given that, it's always sort of interesting to see how these things sound when
it totally is.
They are truly without, kind of without any baggage. Just how do you react when you hear these things for the first time?
And I'm shocked that, again, given the religiosity of this community, I'm shocked that their classmates haven't talked to them more about this sort of thing. But, it's all good. I'm glad that we were able to approach the conversation from, as you say, a blank slate.
Yeah. I mean, I'll always remember Go and I were talking about Jesus and, Go really loves the Greek gods and he had heard something about Jesus and was kind of asking what Jesus's special things were. And
what were Jesus's powers? Dionysus makes people happy and endless wine. And he also resurrected from the dead, dying and rising God.
That was the funny thing. I don't know if I've said it on the podcast, but I was going through some of the miracles and then I was saying, but the biggest thing is that, he died for our sins. That's what Christians really care about. And Go looked at me and he just did this the most amazing, yeah. Shrug. I think when you're not raised with an inherent fear of sin or retribution,
feeling like you're broken at birth.
Yeah, that whole dying for one sin thing really kind of falls. I know flat.
It falls real flat. That's why I wanted to start at the beginning. I started with the Pentateuch, right? I started with Genesis and then going up to some of the messianic prophecies. And then we talked about how for Jesus's followers, they thought that he was or believed that he was the fulfillment of those messianic prophecies. The non-Jesus followers, the Pharisees, and the temple, rabbis, they had no desire to say that Jesus was the Messiah or the Son of God or whatever Jesus was claiming that he was. So yeah, we talked about all that, because I think, the idea of this celestial scrubbing away of an ancient blight is a cool idea. I mean, unfortunately, the blight doesn't go away, and the atonement isn't equivalent to what humans would be expected to undergo if they don't repent and submit. But, all that like secularist atheist griping notwithstanding, it was fun talking to them about it. And I'm glad we did. And like you said, it was cool that we had sort of like a captive audience. We were all sitting there waiting for the drudgery to evaporate and get on our merry way.
Yeah. And so I'll upload some of that audio, and I'll try to catch some of Go's Go reactions.
Yes. Focus on his reactions. Don't focus on my ramblings.
I'll try.
Is they would crucify them. Do you know what crucifixion is as a form of execution? It's kind of horrible.
They trap them to a cross.
What do they do? How do they attach them to the cross?
With nails.
They would nail their hands and they would nail their feet together at the bottom, and they would be stuck up like that out in the sun until they died. But why were they hung up on the cross?
I don't know.
So that other people who might have been following them would see them up on the cross and think twice about following people like that they would pay attention to Rome and not these preachers. Does that make sense? He was born in Nazareth, and he was what's called an apocalyptic rabbi. He told of a time where God would, quote unquote, separate the wheat from the chaff, where he would take the people that he liked with him up into heaven, and he would condemn everybody he didn't like to hell. They would, even though the Jews didn't really have a concept of hell at that point, but that's sort of like, that'll give you an idea of what that meant. Like the people that were good would go to God. The people that weren't good weren't gonna go to God. And what was good? Good was ultimately obeying God's commands. Now, hang on a second. Now, so Jesus,
be going to hell?
This was, yes. So here's the thing. And to sin in Jewish and later Christian thought is when you do something that makes God sad or angry. It's not about something that we necessarily do to each other. It's about how God feels about what we do.
Just like eating tacos. God hates you when you eat tacos.
Exactly. God hates tacos. So,
Question.
Yes.
Was Jesus the first religion?
No. God,
Not
no.
at all.
No, and we're going to get to that. This is even more interesting because we're talking about Easter. So on Easter, today, Friday, the Christians call it Good Friday. Weird to call it Good Friday because this is the day they celebrate Jesus being nailed up on the cross.
Huh?
Yeah. And eggs have to do with Jesus.
Fucking nothing.
What do bunnies that have a lot of sex and babies and eggs have to do with a spring equinox celebrating life and rebirth? Everything.
Yeah.
There are great symbols for it.
So I feel like we have a topic in need of a segment, but I'm just going to do it anyways.
Okay.
So I don't know what this is. This is like Mom's random musings.
Sounds good. We have a title. We have a segment. It can be recurring. In fact, if you want, whenever you want to do a podcast that's just you ranting into the ether.
We can do that.
Sure.
I feel like we already sort of do. I feel like we already do.
No, I talk way too much. I feel like I talk more than you do. That's not fair.
I don't know if that's true, but I've been wanting to talk about this, and then I thought about it again. And this segment is going to highlight a very amusing part of our relationship, which is that I cannot remember movie and actors' names. And so this entire segment is me saying, that person who is in the thing.
Yeah, the person in the thing.
And you coming up with the name. Time. So I hope this is real fun for everybody. But we watched the sci-fi movie about the aliens who come and it plays with time with Amy Adams, I want to say.
Oh, the aliens don't play with time. It's just the framing of the story.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
Arguably both, but yes.
Arguably both. It's called Arrival.
Yes. So we watched Arrival with the kids, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was super well done.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, I think Amy Adams is a very good actress. But part of the story revolves around her being a parent. And it made me think about this thing, which comes up for me a lot. And maybe it is just like my own misogyny. We can talk about this because I feel like I get this reaction a lot more with actresses than with actors. And that could totally be my own stereotypes. But I have a very strong reaction sometimes where I feel like actresses who I otherwise like very much play parents, and I just cannot buy that they are mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked through a lot. I had like a lot of pet theories about it, and I don't know if any of them fit. But I started thinking about this when we were watching Homeland.
Mm-hmm.
Because the actress who plays, what is the main guy's name?
The main guy's name? Oh, you're talking about Morena Baccarin.
Yeah.
Right? Who plays
Yes.
Mrs. Brody.
Yes. So the actress who plays Brody's wife, I just could never believe that she was a mom and those were her kids.
I am on board with that. It felt like a very strange household.
Yeah. And there was just something about her where I was like, not a mom. Like, and so then I went down a rabbit hole and I was like, why? Like, what is it about this? And at first I was like, maybe it's like actresses who like are actually moms feel more like moms than actresses that aren't. But I actually don't think that's true, having done a little bit of poking around. And then I came up with a theory where I sort of felt like, though it's changing in Hollywood, I feel like there is still definitely like sort of a level of physical perfection that is required of female romantic leads that surpasses that required of actors. And I think given my own experience of parenthood, like there's a very, physical aspect of parenting for both men and women, where it's just like everything about parenting is kind of, it like very much gets you into the grossness of your body. I don't know if this makes any sense, but you become a parent and it's like the whole process of being pregnant is, like all these weird things happen to your body. And if you do give birth to become a parent, like whether that's C-section or vaginal birth or whatever, like you're covered in blood and weird stuff that you didn't even know could come out of you. And then like having young children is all about like spit up and vomit and saliva and snot. And there's this very sort of like intense physical quality to parenting. And I feel like maybe there's something in that sort of perfection required by Hollywood that plays counter to that. So that's my sort of pet theory. But then there are like tons of exceptions because I think, I'm going to mispronounce her name, but the actress from Atlanta, is it Zizi?
You mean is Zazie Beetz?
Sorry, Zazie Beetz. She's amazing. Like, I think she can do anything. But I would say she's amazing because she is both kind of gorgeous and can like totally play a romantic lead if she wants to do that. But I also found her 100% convincing as a mom.
Yeah. Well, I mean, V is a great role, period. Just like,
yeah,
there's a lot to love about her character, period.
And, and I was looking at other people and like, I think Connie Britton has been like a very convincing mom. I thought she was great on Friday Night Lights as like an amazing mom.
White Lotus.
And White Lotus is like not a great mom, but also very convincing in her not great momness.
Or doing the Zoom call to China. Yeah. There's just so much to love about that.
But, I think she totally encompasses that, but is like also kind of like has that beautiful Hollywood quality about her. And I was curious if she was a mom. She is a mom, but she was not a mom when she did Friday Night Lights. So clearly, like, it's just a role she's able to play.
Mm-hmm. That was a whole
So I don't know.
child.
I just think it's fascinating. And I wonder if you have any pet theories, if you have the same reaction to dads that you do to moms and stuff, or just if you have any thoughts about it.
I honestly, like, when you brought up this topic, I was on board with talking about it because I know how much, honestly, I know how much it interests you, but how much at the time, at least, it didn't interest me. But since then, I've thought about it, and I find because of the image that a lot of dads in media are supposed to have as the person that does X, not necessarily the person that's supposed to have the emotional approachability or the empathy or the compassion. It's more just like the stoicism or the stalwart thing, the provider, protector. Maybe that comes down to the sorts of media that I consume, but a lot of sort of famous depictions of fathers that we would all like collectively think of would probably fall within that broad spectrum that doesn't necessarily have feminine qualities. And then that it isn't until you look at films where a father is solo parenting that they're required to have more feminine qualities. And when those feminine qualities are culturally acceptable, which is really, I think, not good, because all sorts of men can be fathers and all sorts of fatherhood, are present in society, whether or not media portrays them. And so I think, just like you said, for women, it cuts both ways. For men too, there is this expectation of behavior, of attitude that kind of pigeonholes the sorts of, air quotes, acceptable images of fatherhood. And I think it sucks. I think there are a lot of really great stories to be told when you just have a man who is himself being a father. And whatever shape that takes, that shape is culturally acceptable. Likewise, to have a woman doing motherhood in whatever way makes sense for her as a person. And I'm not saying woman, man necessarily in like sexual characteristics, of course. I'm talking about like gender. We're talking about gender roles, because that speaks to behaviors, right? And perceptions, not just your perception of self and how you present, but how society expects you to perform. And I think a lot of it is just really problematic. And I think that skews like that expectation of what an audience needs out of a viewing experience, how it skews what casting directors look for as archetypes. I think that the fact that you have a hard time seeing a more fully realized, outside of like the Oscar bait character studies, more fully realized depictions of parenthood, I think that speaks to maybe how American culture values parenthood, which is the most problematic aspect of this discussion, I think.
I'm curious, because I think a lot of what you're talking about is sort of the underlying content and story. Yeah. But I wonder more on a level of performance, if there are any actors who you think have done like a particularly amazing or particularly unconvincing job of playing a father?
I love what Paul Rudd does in Ant-Man. I think it's charming. I think it's effortless. I think it's endearing. On the TV side, I like, thinking of genre, I like the depiction of parenting in Raised by Wolves, because it felt
interesting.
It felt like, because we're talking about androids raising humans here, and it felt like mother and father's relationship with Campion, in particular, that their relationship with Campion it feels like almost like they are teenage parents, kind of fumbling their way through learning how to be adults as parents. You know what I mean? Like realizing the enormity of the responsibility, knowing that they biologically did this thing and now they have to take care of this thing, but then starting to work through all the emotions and attachments that bubble up out of the growth of that relationship, out of the refinement and evolution of that relationship. That was really interesting. There are a lot of great examples in TV and film that really pull at my heartstrings.
Is a really interesting example, because I also think
Mitchells versus the Machines.
Oh, true, fabulous dad, like truly fabulous dad,
and Mom, ripping out robot hearts, tearing off robot arms. Yeah, so much to love. But yeah, there are a lot of examples of it done right. That when it's done wrong, for me at least, as a parent now especially, it is just glaring.
Yeah.
And I didn't really realize how bothered I was by it until I went back over my feelings about certain times when I've seen it go awry, after you had told me that this was what you wanted to make the topic for this episode. And I realized, oh yeah, this really annoys me. It annoys me more than I think I even realized. Maybe I was burying my hate so that way I could go on with my TV and movie watching without being constantly derailed by disappointment. But then I kind of find myself begging a question. People get inspired and affected by the media they consume. How do those potentially ineffective, unrealistic depictions of parenting inspire/affect parents and people, intending to be parents in their own real world lives? That's another conversation.
That is interesting. Well, speaking of media, I think it kind of moves us on to our final topic.
Sure.
So I was speaking with Reader, and
yes,
we are in a very interesting point with Reader, because his best friend likes horror movies and watches a lot of horror movies. And Reader is very interested in horror movies and would like to watch more horror movies. Reader is also very affected by horror movies. And we're kind of learning a little bit more. So, he does very well with creature features, like monsters don't scare him very much. But when it gets more to the supernatural, that still has the ability to scare him quite a bit and go as well. And we watch everything together. So we've had a lot of conversations about why we don't allow him to watch certain things. And just last night or the night before, we were having another conversation about how different families make different decisions about what they watch, and how, for his best friend's family, they have certain rules about what he can see, and he is more or less affected by certain things, and we're just all trying to make the best decisions for the people that we are dealing with. And as part of that conversation, he brought up that we allow him to watch much more violent things than his friend is allowed to watch. And he was asking why we make that decision. And I actually had to say, kiddo, I'm not 100% sure.
I know why.
If I'm being
at least for
perfect,
me.
You know why?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so I think if I am being perfectly honest, what I have thought a ton about is that when I was growing up, I was allowed to watch things that would be considered much more mature or adult than my age. And sometimes that was confusing. A couple of times it was probably more scary than I could handle. But in general, I think that was a wonderful part of my childhood and was actually something that I very much wanted to share as a parent. And part of that was that more adult media just sometimes deals with more kind of complex, interesting issues. And I really valued that I was allowed to experience that at an earlier age. And I think it gave me a more nuanced view of the world growing up. And I think it's, like I was saying about Reader and the horror movies, I think it's really important to know your kid, and everybody is going to have certain things that affect them more or less, and to be conscious of that and to watch that stuff with your kids. So if they have questions, you can answer it. But I saw that as kind of a quirky part of my own childhood that I was very eager to share with them. And then so that was very conscious. But, when it sort of comes to more violent media, I think, I have to say, this is an area where I don't think I was super thoughtful about it. And what it really comes down to is I like watching stuff with the kids that I think is good and fun. And because of the media landscape, a lot of that is violent. But I just want to watch interesting, fun stuff with the kids. And so we end up watching a lot of violent stuff because that's a lot of the movies that are made. So I did really have to think about it after he asked the question. And if you've thought about it a lot, I would love to hear your reasoning.
Well, I don't think I thought about it a lot as much as I thought about it in the beginning, came to a quick realization that I've yet to be convinced is wrong, which is we know our kids well enough to know that we can trust them to let us know when things bother them. We watch things with them. When things bother them, we stop. And if we see behavior that bubbles up based on things they watch or video games they play that we think is inappropriate, they stop. Not only do the behaviors have to be addressed, but then we stop consuming that media. So they know. I had this conversation with them early on. When we first watched Die Hard, I think Die Hard was the entry point to all this, as it should be for every family. Anyway, I love Die Hard. So best Christmas movie ever. So, oh, I'm sorry.
Well,
maybe Scrooged.
Not best.
Scrooged.
One of
Scrooged is pretty damn good. Yeah. Anyway. And so is Christmas Chronicles. I like Christmas Chronicles. The whole
not best.
musical number in the jail. I know. It's pretty good. Anyway, that I told them when we were on the verge, when I decided that we were going to have, that you and I would have a conversation about it. And before I was pretty confident you would say yes. I talked to the boys about it, and I said, essentially, I'm thinking of watching something with you in which people get shot and burned. And sometimes they, bad things happen to good people. There's blood, people get shot, people die. And I told them that we would be watching it as sort of an experiment. And the experiment would be to see how they would react to it. And that if they're able to watch it without being upset, and if we see that, they don't, after seeing this movie, run around and throw rocks at kids pretending they're bullets and pretending the kids are like, German thieves, we would look into watching other things that have similar levels of violence. And it wasn't for a while that we thought of watching anything horror related, and then we watched Aliens. I think Aliens was the first sort of horror movie that we would watch, because Aliens, it's a creature feature, but it is actually no sci-fi horror. I would say we saw Aliens before Starship Troopers, or did we see Starship Troopers before Aliens?
No, we saw Starship Troopers first, because I just had
we did.
No idea how insane that movie was.
That movie is gonzo. I mean, it has great world building. It doesn't get the respect it deserves. Anyway. I don't know. I shouldn't say respect maybe is too strong of a word, but
it is just truly wild. It is like almost cool. No other movie I've ever seen.
Yes, you're welcome, by the way. Yeah. But we had options along the way as a family of not watching these, right? But at every point, the boys have been very communicative about what's bothered them and what hasn't bothered them. About what, and sometimes something happens, bad guys get their comeuppance and it's really violent, and goes like, does his characteristic little giggle, right? Like at the end of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the Nazis are melting and exploding and whatever, light flying out of their faces, and goes like, he gets super stoked watching it, as he should be, because you should not tolerate Nazis. So we just take it on a case-by-case basis, and we would necessarily watch the boys' behavior. Since we have started watching all this violent media, and we've let Reader play Dead Space of all things, we haven't seen them be anything other than the sweet-natured kids that they were before we started all this. They still have the friends they had. They've made new ones. They're even more forthcoming with their feelings and, eloquent with how they talk about their feelings and their thoughts. They're not walled off. They're not taking aggressions out on people. They're not modeling bad behavior. None of it. So, like you said, it comes down to what scares them. And so, Reader got freaked out by the beginning of Kubo and the Two Strings, because Kubo's two aunts are super creepy witches. Mm-hmm. And so we watched the first 8 minutes, 10 minutes of the movie, and then had to stop because he was like, can't do it. Nope, done. And so even though it was an animated fantasy feature, we just stopped. And it wasn't for a long time, years before we came back and revisited it and watched it as a family. But yeah, so you just know your kid and you work backwards from there. And that's what I realized that we should do. Give them the benefit of the doubt. I had the conversation with them. I don't think I ever told you I had that conversation with them, but I did. Mm-hmm. And, I have, again, as a skeptic, I have yet to be presented with data that bears out that conclusion to be incorrect. And so we'll just carry on as we are.
I think one of the fun parts of watching different things is seeing the kids learn context. We watched The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that was so fun because that is a very particular kind of British humor. And within the course of half an hour, the kids went from, because there were some moments in that film where really cute things die. Yeah. And it's very funny. And it is meant to be funny. And over the course of about 30 minutes watching the film, at least, I think both kids, but like Reader in particular, I could see him go from being like, oh, is this sad? To understanding the humor and getting it entirely. And that is a really fun moment with kids. So I think as far as like where their heart is, you know, I can definitely see in a movie like, was it Bullet Train? Is that the name of the one we watched recently?
Sure. Yes.
You know, but a guy gets decapitated and it's hilarious and the kids laughed because it's this over-the-top action movie and it's in this sort of ridiculous fight scene and none of it is real. So they can get that humor, but in moments of real emotionality, they are still very emotional kids. Like
Yes.
Reader is still destroyed anytime a father dies. You know, he adores you and you can see it in his emotional reaction. Like father's dying, he will break down and cry. And so I see those reactions and I feel like, kind of like you said, like it's not having, they're able to put things in context and it's not having a bad emotional reaction with them. But I think my bigger concern with violent media, which I haven't really worked through, is just the prevalence of violence in society and the way we heroicize violence in a way that maybe isn't healthy. And I do think about the kids and it's like, I know this is like just what kids do, but like all of their pretend games, most of their pretend games, 90% of their pretend games involve shooting somebody, fighting somebody.
Swords.
Yeah. Swords, guns. I mean, it is all combat. And I think that is both natural for kids. And I think the only thing I would question when I think about it, when I try to think about it harder, is sort of if we are, you know, kind of actively normalizing violence as a heroic, exciting thing. I think it's hard not to. And I don't know if like not watching less would have really changed it because it's like just in everything. But where I sit back and question is less kind of the direct impact and more the, sort of implied like back of the brain impact, which we might not even be seeing.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe we should just stop. We'll tell the kids that we're going to stop. We're going to stop watching action movies and they're not going to be able to play video games where anything explodes.
I think like I just don't see us ever doing
Let's
that.
see what happens. We'll do it as an experiment this weekend and we'll see what happens. We'll see how they respond.
I mean, there is that, but
no, it's not happening.
I know.
I know how they respond.
Because I don't like, it's one of those, it's like taking away TV from kids as a punishment. It's a punishment, but then you're also punishing yourself. And I feel like there's a lot I want to watch and do with the kids. It's violent.
Yeah. Like we just watched Saving Private Ryan, which is incredibly violent, but it also is a very interesting story that has a lot of sort of like moral lessons, dilemmas, questions, beyond like also having a lot of like, historical moments that you can put into context. And I enjoyed watching that again for the first time in many years.
Yeah.
And I don't want to not consume this media with the boys because I think that we have a good thing going and I don't think anything bad will come of it.
But because, it does, I guess, like with so much, I think with so many of these things, I just try to point it out. When we're reading things that that I feel like maybe don't address something in quite the right way, like I really try to make a point of it. So, we read Tintin, which has like really bad colonial stereotypes.
Yeah.
But there are things I really like about it. But I try to say like, ooh, this depiction is gross. I wish he hadn't done that. And now when we read them, the boys will point out those things too. They'll be like, oh, I wish he didn't draw Black people that way. And I'm like, I know, I really do. And so I think less sort of stopping, it makes me think about being more conscious. And it's hard because I feel like a lot of what we watch, it's not so much a problem with the depiction, but maybe more pointing out, why aren't there more heroic movies about people where like the great thing they do doesn't have to do with violence? Because I think that's a real question.
Yes.
And it's easier to point it out when there's like a bad thing in what you're watching. And I think it's harder, and it makes me think about it, where it's harder to point out a lack because it's just not as glaring. You know, it's like we have all of these heroes and they do good things, but like how they do those good things is often violent. And why don't we have more heroes who are doing it in a different way? So,
well, you would, but it would be a comedy where you would have the hero. It would be like Steve Carell as a superhero who never hits anybody and who like goes out of his way to never harm anybody. That would be really actually quite funny. Somebody should write that.
Yeah. But even just the kind, that's what I like about I know we talk about Star Trek so much, but I think Star Trek, another way it's really unique is like, there's certainly fighting, but they have, I think for that kind of show, a huge number of plots where the heroic thing just has nothing to do with that kind of conflict. They actually do a good job of making the heroic thing discovery, exploration, getting consensus, like making a friend out of somebody you wouldn't think you normally could, finding a way to communicate. Like, I think that show is very unique and is a kind of a standout in the way it made a plot that, while it certainly has those elements, does not rely on those elements and remains exciting and fun and a good time for everybody to watch.
For sure. I love Star Trek. There's so much to unpack from so many of the episodes.
But I did come away being like, maybe I should point this out more. Like, yes, this movie was incredibly cool, but like, why are all our heroes like this? And not like Picard or Janeway.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that's a great place to end it.
Yeah.
Ending it on Janeway.
I was thinking about talking about it this week, but like, we would go on forever. But in our next episode, we're going to talk about sex in media and our feelings about that, which I am very excited about.
You would be.
Yeah. So I think we'll wrap it up there.
It sounds great.
As always, we have to thank Jonathan Zalbin and First Frame Music for the music for this episode.
And that wraps up this amazing episode of The Family Skeptical, where nothing is sacred except for our kids. I'm ready for a spice.
Give me 1 second.
Jesus Christ.
It matters for the next thing we're doing.
Great.